It feels like now more than ever, simply taking a good photo is not good enough. With the growing popularity of photography, and to be honest, it being easier now more than ever to start shooting photos, it feels like the bar has been raised when it comes to what qualifies as a great or even good image. With the rise of travel photographers and influencers, people are shooting full time, and photos are seemingly just getting better and better. And for many of us, we don't have the budget to travel to the ends of the world or shoot with the most beautiful looking models to achieve the best images. But to be honest, you don't really need any of that. In fact, I'd be willing to bet you could easily start to make your images better, more cinematic and dreamy by applying a handful of tips that I've learned throughout the years to make your images look a bit more magical and whimsical. Now, for the sake of making a digestible video and for keeping it all aligned in my tiny squirrel brain, I figured it would be best to break up all these things into 4 main groups: techniques, gear, editing, location, which I think are pretty self-explanatory. Techniques being the things we do in camera, gear being the physical gear that we can use to enhance the look, editing being, well, yeah, post-processing, and then location meaning the actual locations and subjects in which we shoot our photos. Alright, well, enough yapping, let's just jump into it. First, techniques. Alright, like I said, these are going to be all the ways that we're going to physically manipulate the images in our camera, whether it be on film or digital. First is shooting at a slower shutter speed. By shooting at a slower shutter speed, we blend movement into these paint-like brush strokes, which compared to the clinical sharpness of 1/1000th of a second or something, we'll be getting a lot more motion and texture in our images. Our dreams tend to be not super concrete and clear, and I think that this slow shutter speed paints motion into these more ambiguous, yet easy to tell movements that are much more easier to interpret than a fast shutter speed. Look at an example of automotive rollers. By shooting with a lower shutter speed, we get that longer, dragged out motion, which conveys the fact that the car is actually moving, compared to a faster shutter speed that crisply stops time but is harder to understand the movement. Next, shooting with a low aperture when it permits. I always think of those Tumblr-style portraits of some woman in some cool landscape where she's completely out of focus, yet the landscape is in focus. It elicits some mystery of who is this mystery woman, while still giving you some semblance and context clues of where you are, much like a dream. Now, obviously this doesn't need to be a portrait, but rather you can put something in the foreground and have it be wildly out of focus, to not only add depth and layers, which will make our images better in general, but also mimic the way our eyes can focus on one specific detail or area while having some sort of tunnel-like vision in our peripheral, much like these low aperture photographs. Next, for technique, not everything needs to be tack sharp. Again, much like a dream, some of the details can be a bit muddied and hard to remember. After all, it's about the feeling and emotion that it evokes rather than honing in on the fine details. I know for me, when I have a powerful dream, within moments of waking up, the details are fleeting, but the feeling that comes with the dream is what lasts. And I think the same thing with image making. Sometimes the most ambiguous and soft photos are the ones that can strike different powerful emotion amongst different people, and I think sometimes you gotta just lean into that. Look at this trend of wedding photos where the couples are all motion blurred and all soft. Again, it's kind of hard to make out what's exactly going on, but you can see that we're in motion, we're having fun, and just spending the time together in this dreamlike state, and I think that that's a culmination of some of these things being displayed. Otherwise, last for technique is dabbling in double exposures. Double exposures are always this little magical slice of photography that, especially when made in camera, can be a bit tricky to nail. However, when you truly get a good one and can overlap a portrait and a cityscape or flowers, it can be an incredibly unique photo. They definitely take some time to pull off well, but leans into that liminal feeling of a mysterious dream and looks so different than any other type of photograph, some controlled chaos, if you will. Plus, for people not in photography, double exposures are wildly impressive, so that definitely helps. By understanding our cameras and being able to correctly manipulate them to create a more carefully crafted image, we can begin to have a higher hit rate with our photos and execute these dreamlike images more and more often. Next, now that we're done talking about technique, let's talk about either the most favorite or hated section: the gear. First, and maybe the most turnkey, shooting with some type of mist filter. A mist filter does exactly what it sounds like. Adds some semblance of mist to the scene, well, sort of. The filters soften the image slightly, but mostly create a blooming highlight effect around the highlights and light sources. Now, these have been used in Hollywood to emulate the look of dreams or heaven for many, many years now, so it's in large part due to that. It's somewhat baked into our knowledge about dreams and the afterlife thanks to modern media. Additionally, I think dreams and the thought of heaven specifically have this angelic glow to it, just like a sheen of positivity that sort of fills the whole space, and these mist filters sort of give off that vibe. Plus, the glow just kind of gives off this angelic which I don't know why. Next, shooting with a cinema film that gives halation. Alright, so old cinema film or film from CineStill gives off a similar halation to the highlights that a mist filter does, but does in camera and on the actual film itself. Honestly, a very similar result as the mist filter. People love to shoot this film at night of gas stations, unique tungsten lighting, portraits, etc. Again, leans in this angelic glow that reminds me of soft dreams. Next, shooting with a really wide angle lens up close. Now, over the last handful of years, this look has gotten especially popular for fashion portrait shoots, it seems. By having a super wide, sometimes fisheye lens, you get some distortion, especially as you get closer to your subject, which can just make things look different. People's shapes can look different and elongated, again, leaning into that confusing whimsicalness that dreams ooze. By using a simple 50mm and taking a cliche portrait, it looks quite boring and sterile versus getting a unique angle up close. With that wide angle, it just looks a lot more outside of the box. Sometimes almost strange, which if you're anything like me is just like my dreams, strange. It feels like there's some semblance of grounded reality, yet something just seems off, and that's exactly the look that we're trying to achieve with it. Alright, and last up for gear is just shooting with film. Shooting with film can evoke nostalgia, which is adjacent to dreaminess in my opinion. Now, this one maybe is a bit of a given granted the normal topics of the channel, but yeah, the film is just more dreamy and cinematic compared to the crisp clinical look of digital. I mean, think about it. All of our memories from growing up as children, or memories from our parents or grandparents, or even celebrities are all taken on film negatives. From old landscapes, vintage photos, to family heirlooms, for the vast majority of us, at least at this point in time, are all taken on film, which is essentially physical manifestations of memories. I mean, what are dreams? Well, to me, it's your thoughts and memories being jumbled up in your brain and forming somewhat of an alternate reality, regardless of how silly or strange those things may seem. So to me, shooting on film, shooting on the closest thing we have to reliving memories, just automatically has this dreamlike feeling and quality to it that I really don't think you can replicate with digital photos personally. I mean, I think about as you and I get older, are we going to have any of these digital photos on our phones as we get older? You know, when I'm 80, am I going to have all these selfies or whatever of me? No, those are all going to be gone. They're all going to be lost. All these digital files are going to be lost, long gone. But what we do have are negatives. Again, the physical manifestation of a memory. All right, enough of me up on the pulpit. Let's move on to the next section. Let's go to editing. It's not super long. All right, so we're here in Lightroom, and first we're gonna add some softness or just take away some of the clarity. We don't wanna go too far and soften the photo too much and make it just look like mush. Again, this is kind of the same mindset with not everything needs to be super sharp, and this takes away some of that clinical sharpness. Now, depending on your scans, they might be soft enough, to be honest, so just have some creative liberties to it, but play it safe. Next is bumping vibrance a touch. Again, nothing too crazy, otherwise the photo will look super over-processed. But some vibrance can add some vividness to the image, especially with film where the scans can come out relatively flat and people can be a bit afraid to edit them. Then in that case, we definitely want to be at least getting it back to lifelike, if not just a touch punchier. After all, we are chasing the cinematic and dreamy look. Which brings us to the last part, but I think this might be the most important step, potentially, is bringing the shadows up just a hair. We want to make sure we don't make it too devoid of contrast. We definitely still want contrast, but by bumping the shadows up, we get this more pastel-y, airy photo. That again feels like almost an angelic haze is in the photos, and I think it looks nice. Don't fall into the trap of cranking the whites or highlights down too much though, otherwise again, we'll lose contrast quick. And it's okay for the brightest sections to be just that. Right. All right, last up, probably the most accessible one, which I think many of you would argue against initially, location. Okay, before I get comments, but Keaton, I live in the middle of nowhere. Well, I grew up in central Wisconsin where there's nothing but bars. There's literally more bars than grocery stores. Yeah, look it up. But yes, obviously, if you come from a little boring area on textbook, there's not going to be any super low-hanging fruit like in bigger cities or more scenic areas. But if you're from a small town or the middle of nowhere, you're probably one of the few photographers. Thus, you've been given sort of a nice chance to be the only one to be documenting that area, growing in that local market, etc. Plus, no matter where you're from, someone from around the world would think that your little local town is super interesting just because it's so different to them. Think about it. You go to some small town in Austria or something, let's say, and it feels like something out of a movie or a dream. You're living this European summer because, well, it's different. You're adventuring and you're exploring, whereas a local in that same Austrian town may have the same helplessness feeling as you when it comes to capturing their hometown. The very same town that you're spamming with film every which way on vacation. So personally, I would implore you to learn about your local culture and uniqueness of your area and perhaps find a way to lean into that. For me, living and moving to Colorado, it was intentional to be closer to all the landscapes and outdoor lifestyle work here. Whereas if I was in Japan, maybe I'm taking photos of Japanese street and car culture or those cute little gas stations or vending machines around the neighborhood. To us, that's like the magnum opus trip, but to locals in Japan, that's just another day in their hometown. Something to think about. Which leads me into the next one. It's by matching your subject to the location. Think Western style location with a Western styled model or subject, or maybe a much more styled fashion shoot or urban shoot in a downtown area. By styling a model or subject to the location, it can create a really thematic image that can feel intentional yet not something that's seen every day. Conversely, we can break that rule entirely to lean into the strange dream vibe. Maybe putting an astronaut in a Western setting or vice versa. A good example off the top of my head, there's a photographer who recently has been taking photos of athletes participating in their sport, but it's in super unconventional places, which as you see is super cool, unique, and definitely elicits that feeling of being in a dream. Dude, I had a dream last night where someone was bowling in the grocery store. That type of vibe. Next, shooting in nostalgic locations. Again, nostalgia to me at least evokes the emotion of dreamy or of a past time that perhaps we're longing for. By finding locations that are nostalgic by nature, perhaps an old 50s themed gas station, old auditorium, basketball courts, etc., we can tap into those emotions. I know for me, when I see images like this, I tend to think of my grandpa as an adult, or my parents as kids, or in general the 50s through the 90s, which in many ways was such a magical time before the internet. I mean, look at all the shows that are period pieces leaning into those aesthetics, that 70s show, Stranger Things, Fargo, etc., etc. Especially with how far modern aesthetics have come, capturing those places feels like something out of a time capsule or even a dream, some might say. Alright, and last but certainly not least, shooting in golden hour, blue hour, or just unique lighting situations in general. Okay, I don't know. Maybe this is obvious, but as I've progressed through my photography journey, the single most important thing, regardless of camera or location, is lighting. Lighting can single-handedly make something boring and flat look dynamic and interesting. Now, the same is to be said about landscape photography, portraits, product, and literally every other niche of photography. By having a dynamically lit scene and shooting during golden hour or blue hour, you tend to get much more interesting images than shooting at midday. Unless you're shooting some abstract building photography with harsh shadows, then yeah, obviously midday is best. Otherwise, the soft, warm lighting from golden hour can make your subjects glow and definitely leans into that dreamy, perfect lighting aesthetic. As for blue hour, it's the most interesting lit time of the day, allowing scenes to look much more ominous or unique than normal lighting. I know Todd Heido and Willem Verbeek both have some really cool blue hour shots that seem so desolate and creepy, yet oddly inviting. Not sure how to explain it, but it definitely feels like one of those dreams where no matter how hard you try, you simply cannot run fast enough. I hate those. Ultimately, you want to avoid boring midday light, as it sort of just creates boring flat photos that all look the same to a certain extent. But I guarantee by following these tips, you'll start to see improvement with your images and will start crafting more and more that look dreamlike or from a movie scene or something of the like. I know for me, I keep these at the forefront of the work I want to create, as these dreamy scenes are exactly the type of vibe and emotion I like to get out of people when they see my images. I love when people comment things like dreamy or ooh, this looks like something out of a dream. It means that I'm on the right path. Otherwise, if you guys have any suggestions on how to create more dreamy like photos, definitely let me know in the comments, as I know other people would be appreciative of that as well. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Until the next one, stay safe, stay shooting, adios.